Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the next episode of the Culture Eats Everything podcast. I'm with Dr. Schroeder, Dr. Monica Schroeder, the Deputy Superintendent and soon to be Superintendent of the Northshore School District 112. And we're really excited to talk about succession planning. This is a follow up to my conversation with the current superintendent just a few weeks ago. And so, welcome to the show, Monica.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I listened to the last podcast episode with Dr. Mike Liebefeld, our current superintendent, and I was excited for part two, my version.
Yes, and hopefully we'll have some fun with this and hear some different perspectives and maybe even some things that you guys saw differently through the journey.
Sure.
And you're starting officially next year, so July 1st of 2026. And so you guys are literally co-working together. You're kind of going through this journey together, which we'll talk a little bit about as well, and sort of how that's working, the ups and downs and all that fun stuff. But let's start with the advocacy you did for yourself, because I know it's really important to you, and I think it's brilliant how you approach this.
Sure. Thank you. Well, I am so fortunate and privileged to have worked in North Shore School District since 2006. I was an associate principal, assistant superintendent, and now deputy superintendent. So I've held many roles here, and I have experienced some incredible highs and sometimes some lows as well. We lived through a failed referendum. We had to close some schools. We had to shift staff. We had to implement a reduction in force. And so I have been through incredible experiences here, but also some challenging ones. So when Mike shared that he was planning to retire, and he said to me, "Are you interested in being the next superintendent? I just want to just kind of feel you out to see what your interest level is prior to the board posting the position and going through a search. I wanted to know what your thoughts were." And Mike and I were so fortunate. He's the one who hired me in 2006 as an associate principal. He was in his first year in HR, and we have known each other for a long time. Even though he hasn't worked here that entire time, he took a little brief break and became superintendent in two local school districts and then came back to us. We've had a really long-standing positive working relationship. And so I shared with him, while I was not interested in being superintendent anywhere else, I was interested in being the next superintendent here because we've done some incredible work together with our staff, with our leadership team, with our community, always focusing on our students. And I did not want someone else to come and take the reins and possibly change the direction that we're going. And quite frankly, I didn't want to be anyone else's number two. I was ready to take that on here. So following that conversation, he said, "How about you start meeting with the Board of Education?" And we started meeting two by two, like the board president and another board member each time. I'd meet with them for breakfast. And we started having really informal conversations, what we would think is like interviews, but not as structured, and really talking about my vision for the school district and, really how I lead. Mike and I have very similar vision, but our leadership styles are very different. And talking about how I really value building capacity of our leaders. And when I say leaders, it's broad. It's our cabinet leaders, it's our principals, our associate principals, our instructional coaches, and then our teachers. Our teachers are leaders, and our teachers also set the tone for our students to become leaders. So having those kind of conversations were really critical. It got to a point where, they started to kind of feel me out and say, "Well, how would you feel if we did a search and you were part of, that search process? How would you feel?" And, I was honest. I felt like I had to advocate for myself. Being that my love and passion and the role that I've held for the last 11 years has been focused on leading human resources in our district as the head of our personnel services department. I felt like the greatest indicator of my success is my past performance. They've seen me shine. They've also seen areas where we've really had to put our heads together during difficult situations. They know my relationships with the union. So I shared with them that, I would feel that if I needed to be part of a panel, being part of a selection process for this superintendent role, that I would also have to then protect my personal interests and look elsewhere, which is not something I want to do. I wanted to be the superintendent here, nowhere else, but also that would be sending me a message that we're unsure of me, and I would need to make sure that I was looking out for myself. Fortunately, they didn't want me looking anywhere else. I didn't want to go anywhere else. So I was appointed on June 11th, 2024, I believe, as the next superintendent for July 1st, 2026. It's wild to say that because it's been a long journey. We're almost closing year one of a 2-year succession plan, and time has gone by very, very quickly, but I'm very grateful for having a board that really understands and supports succession planning, because we know the role of the superintendent is critical in an organization. And when there's turnover, there's a ripple effect in our organization, and they understood the value of being intentional in that selection and being intentional in the planning. And I'm really grateful for our school board for doing that, because obviously there's also a cost to it. Mike is still the superintendent. I'm still the deputy superintendent, but this past year we've had a director of personnel services working in that department, because there's no way that I would be able to run HR and learn alongside Mike. So I'm really grateful for the board to understand that financial impact, understanding that it's temporary, and understanding that it's actually going to pay off in the long run. So I'm very grateful for our school board.
Yeah, and I love that you, like I said, advocated for yourself and took a
Mm.
strong stance there. You had mentioned before we started this discussion that, especially as a female leader, this was really important to you. So talk a little bit about that. Why is that important?
Yeah, I could just tell you, in the state of Illinois, 70% of superintendents are white males. And I think it's really important to advocate for females in leadership. I'm also Latina, so the statistics nationally are, I think, we're less than 3% are Latina superintendents. I really had to lean in and advocate for myself, and not sit back and just say, sure, I'll be a part of a selection process. Sure, I could, compete against anyone, because unfortunately the statistics are working against people like me. And the board also recognizes all the assets that I bring, my strengths, and I'm just grateful that they understood where I stood with that.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great lesson for aspiring female superintendents out there that don't just take what you're offered, but actually take a stand for what you think makes sense. And especially in your case, given your 19 years of amazing service there, that's pretty phenomenal. You had mentioned that you've been through some lows there, which is perfectly understandable in those 19 years. What's one particular that stands out to you that that would be helpful for our audience to learn from you about?
Well, the reason why I'm so passionate about succession planning is, after we had a failed referendum of about 70% of a no vote, we shortly thereafter lost our superintendent. He left mid-year for a different opportunity out of state, and we experienced that sudden loss of the superintendent, which was not planned. And it did send our organization into chaos at the time. And we were left at that time scrambling. I helped the board at that time with our attorney for the Board of Education, helped to select interim superintendents who were phenomenal. We were so fortunate to have retired superintendents step in for 18 months. But any organization that's experienced that, that's still just temporary. It's not permanent. And they did a lot of heavy lifting in those 18 months, which led us to be able to have such a qualified candidate like Mike come back. What we say, he came back home. But that was very jarring for the organization, and I experienced that. And personally, on the personal level, that was a frightening time. That was a time where I had to think to myself, do I want to remain here? And some of my colleagues ended up leaving and going to other places. I'm the only person from that cabinet team that remains after that had occurred. So for me, it was really important for us to have a clear path forward for Mike's impending retirement and really thinking about the impact on the staff, because it does impact all levels of the organization, and people like order, and people like clarity, and people like systems and structures. But when there's something that happens suddenly, it's really difficult to recover for that. And it took us a while. The positive thing is that we are in a great place. We take culture surveys of our staff. In our fall survey, 86% of our staff is highly engaged and highly satisfied. We're also seeing some of our highest proficiency rates with our state testing. We recently got our EL access tests back, and we're seeing double rates of students exiting with their English language learner labels. So we're seeing a lot of success. But that was a very difficult time. And, you know, when I look back on that, Mike started 8 years ago. That was only just, 10 years ago. And it's amazing to see how we've recovered, but it took a while to get to where we are today.
Well, that 86% engagement is beyond impressive. I don't know if you saw the most recent Gallup
Yeah.
survey, but it's fallen yet again, to
Yes.
around 30%. So that's really, really impressive in this day and age, especially given we're still sort of emerging from COVID and there's just so many challenges around the world and locally and across the country. So my hat's off to you guys. Clearly, you guys are doing something right when it comes to just shaping that culture. And I think you're absolutely right that especially educators love stability, which is a good thing, right? We want our first grade teachers to be quite stable, for the kids. And the flip side of that is it can be hard to innovate, to bring in new change. What's your experience there?
Well, to me, it's all having those conditions for that change to occur. So going back to that culture piece, after experiencing what we experienced, Mike coming in, Mike started to say we have to assess our culture. I remember having a pit in my stomach thinking, oh my gosh, here's where I get fired. Our culture is going to be terrible. I think that first assessment was 67% of our staff was highly engaged and highly satisfied. I remember at that time, I felt like I was just going through the motions of being the HR leader. And, HR is tough. Like we experienced some amazing highs with staff when you hear about people who are getting married, people who are having babies, people when they first are signing their contracts, but then also you experience loss with them too, when they have personal loss. And, you mentioned COVID. So I would say probably a year after Mike took the helm here, I listened to a local superintendent, Andy DeRoss, who's the superintendent of Schaumburg. He's had a lot of success in that school district. And I heard him talk about Sean Akers' work from the Happiness Advantage on positive psychology. And hearing him talk and thinking like, I am not in control of people's happiness. People are in control of their own happiness. And thinking about if we were to invest in really understanding that aspect, and teachers and staff and leaders understanding that we can actually apply some principles to our own personal life and thinking about how we impact others in the organization, that could be a game changer. And we did. We launched into years of this, book studies, staff meetings with activities. We now I have an orange lanyard on because we train all of our staff in the orange frog training. So that, focus on positive psychology, on optimism, has really helped us do hard things in this district. And when I mean by hard things, all that training started happening before COVID. It was just unbelievable. I mean, people said to me, how did you know that you had to do that beforehand? I didn't. I will never forget. We started this training and all of a sudden, March 13th, I think it was, what was it, 2020? We had to shift and we shut down our schools. No one predicted that. And that spring, I had already had Orange Frog training planned across the entire district. We had done some book studies and some work. And I'm like, okay, we're going to do this virtually. Well, that day, we had 550 employees logging on. The internet went out. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. And I was like, we had to pivot, right? And I remember receiving emails later saying like, Monica, like we've learned, like, when things like this happen, like we could fail forward, like it's okay. And we did, and we ended up doing the training. And those kind of like moments have helped us. And sometimes some of the most difficult things that have occurred in this community. Unfortunately, we had a shooting in downtown Highland Park a couple of years ago that had mass ramifications for our community. People were murdered and injured, and our community came together. And one of the things that our teachers did is they started to lean into those social connections that they learned about and started leaning into those conscious acts of kindness as a result. So really setting that foundation, we know that we could do hard things in this organization. They're not easy. Right now we are in the middle of $250 million in construction, which requires us to shift our staff into what we call swing sites, where their school is under construction for 18 months and we move all the students and staff mid-year when the building is ready. You can imagine packing up these buildings. Sorry, we're in a school. Packing up these buildings is not easy, but people, again, they understand that when we rally together, when we pull together, it's those social connections, we could do difficult things together. And I think that's really helped us.
Well, sort of a theme I hear underneath this, and clearly you're in front of a sign that says sprinkler control valve. I know you're in one of your schools, Monica, which shows you're not above the work, you're in the work with the people, and I would imagine there's a great depth of relationship, and clearly you and Mike have done a lot of work together. And so as we pivot back to talk more directly about this
Yeah.
succession planning and transitions, you mentioned earlier that you both have pretty different leadership styles. You're both very very positive, very energetic, I would say. But I would imagine that there's quite a bit of difference between you as well. And so, how has that showed up? How has that been helpful? Maybe how has that been challenging as you have gone through this succession planning?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that when people first hear that, I'm going to be the next superintendent from the outside, I'll have people say like, wow, you have big shoes to fill. And I always say, yeah, I wear different shoes. And they kind of look at me and I kind of chuckle because I am not Mike Lewefeld and I will never try to be Mike Lewefeld because we have different leadership styles. But we obviously have a lot in common because, that's what's been able to keep this organization afloat. We both are passionate about student learning. We both are the type of people that we roll up our sleeves and we get into the work. Like you mentioned, like we're not above, working alongside our teachers. We also believe in the power of building positive relationships. We both have very positive relationships with our unions. And I think that's the key to making sure that we always think about like, how do we best support students? Well, that's all of us. And I think those are really things that have helped us in our careers as we move through different roles together. Where I think that we're different, people will say like Mike is so energetic and he is sometimes has a lot of different spinning plates and he has a lot of ideas and a lot of creativity. And I am laser focused and I have a plan. And I like to have a plan and I like to have some consistency in what I'm doing. So one of the things that I'd say that's really helped the two of us as we move forward is I created a 2-year succession plan, literally an entry plan for me as I transition into the role. And Mike and I laid this out and then said, what do you think? Does this make sense? How comfortable are you with this? We made it clear again to everyone. He is the superintendent until June 30th, 2026. I take the helm July 1st, 2026. But in doing that, we've also had to share with our leadership team, you're going to see some shifts. And so we recently, the last, I'd say about 2 months ago, we said, year 2 of this succession plan is going to look very different. I am now going to be facilitating the leadership team meetings. I'm now going to be running the cabinet meetings. Mike is still running all the regular board meetings, but I'm going to be taking over all the board committee meetings. And we shared with them why that is, because we have never intentionally planned in this organization for a superintendent to retire. I feel so comfortable leading our leadership team but it's with the understanding is that we're building their capacity so that when I take over, my focus is on the board. That's my blind spot. I've never been a superintendent. Mike is a master at partnering with the board and leading the board. And I feel like that's something that I have to learn from him. So I really want to make sure that I am preparing our leadership team for that transition when Mike retires and I'm now the superintendent. I'm no longer the deputy superintendent because we're not backfilling that role. What we also with succession planning, sometimes there is unexpected. We had our assistant superintendent for teaching and learning role open up. Our current director of personnel is a former very successful principal. He's done an amazing job in HR. But Tom, I noticed when this position opened up, I said to him, I said, Michael, his name is Dr. Michael Rodrigo. I said, I feel like when you were a principal, I saw you with your staff and with the students, and I felt like you were the Pied Piper of learning. And there's this opportunity. Do you want to remain in HR or do you want to move to teaching and learning? He said, oh my gosh, I never thought that you'd be asking me this. I said, think about it. He came in the next day. He said, I would love to go into teaching and learning. So we shifted him there. And then someone who is in student services, a coordinator, another very successful principal, Miss Rachel Filippi, I asked her, are you interested in HR? She said she is. So next year she'll be the executive director of personnel services. So while my position won't be backfilled, we will have someone else leading HR. And so it's really important for me to take this year to really help develop them, coach them, be prepared for that shift when Mike is gone and I'm running the school district to make sure that our cabinet feels comfortable helping to support all of our principals and develop our leaders, because they're going to have to really take a lot of initiative to take things out on their own, because obviously I will delegate, I won't abdicate, but I'm also going to have my focus on what's important, which is the Board of Education in our community.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. As you think about, there's lots of different ways to do this, right? As I told Mike in the last time we talked, I said what people often miss with succession planning is that success is built into the word succession planning, but we don't start by slowing down to say what is success? What is success for us or for our district? And that may be different. Some districts have different focal points and have different communities that they're serving. And so getting really clear about what does success look like is the first step. So you don't have a last minute sort of person leaving, which creates an interim situation, which can create years of challenges. And so you guys have done a brilliant job of obviously putting together a longer term, multi-year plan, which is fantastic. And so, but there's also potential downsides. Having that much overlap, I would imagine could also be challenging, especially for the people that you're leading, because they're kind of looking up saying like, well, I know that technically he's the superintendent, but she's about to be the superintendent. And so how is that playing out? What are the challenges there that we can have the audience learn from here?
Yeah, I think that's really important. Number one, Mike's and my relationship is really strong. So we could close the door and we can look at each other and I could say like, are you okay? Or it's starting to feel a little mom daddish. Like I'm feeling like someone's coming to Mike, asking him a question, then they're coming to me. Let's sit down and talk about like who is going to take the lead on this. And I think we need to do a better job communicating because like I said, it could get confusing really fast to people. I will give you an example. There was a moment where I said, I feel like I'm drowning a little bit. I feel like I have too many hands and too many pots and I need some help. And he said, okay, what can I do? And again, going back to that laser focus, I said, as I mentioned, with construction, I was going to all of our owners, construction, architect meetings every week. Well, we have 2 at a time. And I said, Mike, I'm feeling like that is pulling me away from me being able to spend time developing our principles. I said, is there a shift that we can make here? And he's like, absolutely. I mean, we're in project 4 right now, 4 or 5. We have so many going on. And I had been integral in projects 1, 2, and 3. So I said, I will pick that back up when you retire, but I feel like you need to take the helm of this right now. And he said, absolutely. Another area where I was feeling a little bit like I need some help is, as you can imagine, Tom, when I've been named superintendent, people want a piece of you. People want to talk to you. Outside vendors want to talk to you. People want to know who's the next superintendent. So I have to be very cautious with my time because I do still have responsibilities that I oversee. I evaluate, I coach principals. I mean, I have a lot of responsibilities that I think are really important. So one of the things I asked Mike is, I said, I know a lot of people go through you and say, like, I want to meet Monica. Can you help keep people at bay for right now? Can you help keep people at bay and understand that there are certain things that I will engage with right now, but there's other things that are going to have to wait till I'm the superintendent? And I think what was really helpful is that we engaged in a strategic change process. Um, it was 2011 was the last time we had a strategic plan. So Mike said, why don't you select the group that you'd like to work with? So, I selected Schlechte Group, and I said I had been a part of the process as a principal in 2011, and I felt like it was very adult focused, and I'd like this to be more focused on students. And Schlechte came in, and we had 200 people involved in the process, and 80 of them were students. So I was thrilled. And so now we have a strategic change agenda, we call it, with 3 major goals. And I've been fortunate enough to lead those efforts in terms of goal creation. So I recently read The 4 Disciplines of Execution for Educators by Sean Covey. We're working with the Franklin Covey Group, and we are going to have 2 wildly important goals this next year, one of them being a focus on improving literacy proficiency, which I'm really passionate about. And so going back to, like, how can you help me, is maybe keeping people at bay that don't align to that vision and those goals right now, because we need to be laser focused in order to keep the needle moving in the right direction with everything going on, because you could see there is a lot going on. And he's been wonderful with that. And we've had some really open conversations about that.
Yeah, it sounds like at the heart of that is really a couple things. One is your laser like focus, which is fantastic. That as leaders, when we get ourselves involved in too many things, then nothing really becomes excellent. And so that certainly is very helpful. And the other is even much more basic than that. That when there's an issue, we don't avoid it. We talk it about it. We get into a room and we hash it out together. And I think that's really a really critical element here too. That's often overlooked, especially in education. I think that because we have such stability minded, sort of harmonious folks, conflict is like, you may as well tell them to jump off a cliff, right? We do not like quote unquote conflict. And so we tend to be avoidant of things. And so one of the big lessons here, I think, is to actively resolve things as issues come up, sit down and talk it out, figure it out together.
Yeah, I will also say, when I was negotiating my contract with the Board of Education, I felt it was critical for me to also have executive coaching built in. So I do have an executive coach that I work with, and I think that was critical for me to find someone outside of this organization. I found someone who had been a successful superintendent for 15 years, and he coaches me, and we have conversations about how to navigate certain situations. And that was really important for me to invest in my own professional development, because I don't know many people who have a 2-year succession plan in place. And that's also been challenging as well, because for me, I want to be very conscious of not, stepping on his toes, being clear, but then also navigating, like, Mike is going through a major change. He's going to be retiring, and really also focusing on, I think it's important for us to plan for his retirement in a way that is respectful and also celebratory. So there's a lot of things that I'm already starting to plan for next year, because he and I have also been very open about the fact that, yes, these events and activities that we have planned are for him, but it's also for the organization. It's very symbolic for them to see that there is a very positive passing of, the torch, so to speak. And I think that's also really critical, is really understanding how important it is to really stop and have some of those traditions, and for our organization to see that I'm leading some of those initiatives, I think is really important as well.
Yeah, I'm struck by how really fortunate you both are to have each other really through this journey. It is quite unique, especially that much of an overlap in time, because I would imagine he'll be facing all sorts of challenges and emotions with his retirement that he's not even aware of yet. And to have a partner like you to navigate that with, I'm sure will be hugely helpful to him and vice versa. You guys can really help each other make this a positive transition that's ultimately good for the two of you, but more importantly is good for Northshore. And so as we wrap up here, I guess what would you what would be your parting advice for folks out there listening, whether it's a board member maybe of a school district or an existing superintendent or aspiring superintendent? Like if you were to really think about this succession planning, what are the maybe two or three things that are really important?
I think the key to succession planning is thinking about the role, thinking about how that role impacts the organization, and understanding that we really are here to serve, and really thinking about that that next person that you're possibly looking at as your superintendent. What are the relationships like that he or she have currently, and thinking about like what are the systems and processes and practices that you have in place that can continue, and what are some of those things that you may want to change, and have open discussions with that person. Again, I also think that it's really primed to make sure that your culture is ready for that kind of a change. Like as I mentioned, our culture is in a really positive place. It made sense. It really did for this to happen. And as I mentioned, like I didn't want to be the superintendent just anywhere. I wanted to be here. I love the people. I love our community. I love our kids. I know that there are always, some challenges, but I really feel deeply that we can do really tough things together. And I think that's key, really making sure that you think about the impact on that organization. Success for me is retaining our staff, retaining our leadership. And I think we've been able to do that. I know there's also that excitement. I recently was in a coaching session with one of our associate principals, and I said to her, tell me about like what your impact, has been this school year. And she said, Monica, I came from another organization where I would say my job was easy. And she said, and I was almost a little bored. And she said, I had the most amazing work-life balance. She said, I came here this year, and she's like, I am not bored. My work-life balance is a little off, but she's like, I've never found a job to be more gratifying. I'm so excited about our vision. I love the direction that we're going. And that to me is really what success is really thinking about, motivating our staff and having a vision that's exciting to people, where they could be engaged, where they're excited to work together. And to me, that's succession planning, is thinking about like, how do we make this organization better than, when it first started. And I'm very fortunate. Mike came at the right time for us, and he really put us in a good spot, and really thinking about like, how do we continue that work and even make it better?
I love it. I love it. Especially how many times you brought up this idea of engagement. I mean, you may recall that's the name of our book, The Great Engagement, and it's all about how do we create more engaged cultures, because to us, culture really does eat everything. It is the difference maker. And we can't just maintain it. Culture is constantly evolving, constantly changing. And if we're not pushing it forward, if we're not pushing up the hill, gravity takes over and we can start to slip backwards a little bit. And so I love the positive energy, the focus on engagement, the focus on culture that you guys are bringing to this. And so keep doing the great work, Monica. It's so great to have you on today, and thank you for the time.
Thank you. It's my honor. And thank you so much for talking about this really important topic. It's something that Mike and I clearly are passionate about, but I will put in another plug. I'm the president of the American Association of School Personnel Administrators. And this is a topic that's really critical, especially when we have an educator shortage, is really thinking about how do we really plan for our future during a difficult time. And I think succession planning is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you again. Have a
Yep.
great rest of your day.
Thank you, you too.